This podcast is brought to you by RPM Studios, located at 1027 Camels Run Road in Carnegie, Pennsylvania. RPM Studios offers a full line of digital media production services, such as podcasting, live streaming, video production, post-production, multi-track recording, digital graphics. For more information, please check out our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/RPM Studios. Now on with the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Don't Quit Your Day Job. I'm Jim Patulski, gentleman podcaster, and I welcome you to the show. On today's show, we're going to be doing sort of just a free-form, what I call a roundtable discussion. It's not really roundtable in this case because it's just myself and my co-host, Dave Buzard. We're going to be discussing a specific topic each time we do one of these shows. And eventually we will have a group of people come in and just kind of throw it out there for public debate, I guess. But today's topic is rock dead? And Dave and I will be bouncing around our individual ideas about this. And later in the show, we're going to be joined by my dear friend RICHIE RANNO from the band Starz to further talk about the subject. And Richie has a long career releasing records with Capitol Records, and he was managed by Billy Coyne and Rocksteady Management, who also handled Kiss. And he's got a lot of great stories touring with bands like Aerosmith and Rush, and as you can imagine. So he will be here to regale us with his memories shortly. So sad week this past week. Going with the theme of the show, we've been losing some of our great rockers, such as Rick Ocasek from the Cars and Eddie Money. So I would like to dedicate today's show to Rick and Eddie and all the great rockers that we have lost recently, from Tom Petty to Glenn Frey to David Bowie to Prince and so on. So thank you again for joining us, and on with Don't Quit Your Day Job.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a
podcaster.
Do you expect me to talk?
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
You have a big mouth.
Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for Don't Quit Your Day Job. A very good evening to you. It's a wonderful evening here at RPM Studios in beautiful Carnegie, Pennsylvania. With me today is my partner in crime, Mr. Dave Buzard. Say hello, Dave.
Hello, Dave. How are you doing tonight, Jim?
Doing good, man. Hey, thanks for coming out. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
We've been trying to do this, get this thing back together again for quite a while now.
I know.
So I'm very happy to have you here. So tonight we're going to kind of riff. This is kind of going to be one of our roundtable kind of discussions, and we're just going to pick a topic. Tonight's topic is going to be, is rock dead? And it kind of is. I mean, what are you thinking, Dave?
On the popular scale, to pop culture, it sure seems to be dead, or like it never even existed. There was so little representation of rock and roll in, on TV, mm-hmm. Of course on radio. It just seems to be rock and roll is now part of advertising, and it's all classic rock stuff.
Maybe we should start with kind of defining rock and roll. Is it the attitude? Is it the sound of the music? Is it a combination of the two?
It was always, loud guitars and attitude, and and there was, you knew it was good if your parents didn't like it, mm-hmm. And then it just got more and more accepted, like everything does, until it's just part of the fabric of the country and the society and culture, and then it just, like everything else, it gets diluted.
Yeah, it gets co-opted.
Yeah.
With the record companies, advertisers, the film industry, everybody just kind of.
Right.
But going back to, I guess it got its started. It got its start back in the 1950s. They say the first rock record. A lot of people think it was "Rock Around the Clock," Bill Haley in the Comets.
And there's also a big contingent out there that think a song called Rocket
88.
Yeah.
That I was just going to say that preceded Bill Haley, if you want to call that a rock record. So yeah, Rocket 88 was probably the first record, and then of course everybody, rock and roll was really a sexual term. It was slang for sex, and I think it was first. Yeah, I guess Alan Freed is given credit for coining the phrase and applying it towards this kind of music.
And the phrase that they would use is rock and roll music, which would translate to "this is sex music."
Right. Yeah. Or race records they called them at the time. They thought it came from black music because it did. It came from blues, and in blues, that beat, the 4/4 beat, is kind of the sex beat. Yeah. It's a sexy rhythm.
Right.
And I think that is why a lot of people objected to it. That in the race thing.
You will break your penis if you try to bone to a waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1. Oh, you're gonna fold it over. You're gonna fold it right in half.
I don't know. 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2.
The visual is great, Jim.
Yeah.
I'm glad your chair's on wheels.
I was imagining it too. I was totally visualizing that.
Your chair's on wheels.
I was totally imagining the look on her face. 1, 2, 3, 1. Nah. Not ain't gonna work. But yeah, that's where it came from. And Alan Freed, Alan Freed got credit for a lot of things that I don't believe he deserves to take credit for.
Okay.
Because I think he got credit for combining the races, playing black records on his radio station in Cleveland,
right?
Which is it's
on a white station.
White station.
What's a white station?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they called it race music back then, and a lot of people objected to it, but he did it anyways. And they started having concerts where it was segregated, where the black audience was on one side, the white audience was on another side, and they eventually just started combining. Mm-hmm. But from what I understand, and this is before my time, Porky Chedwick here in Pittsburgh, on Whammo, was actually doing it before Alan Freed did that. So in Porky's he's a Pittsburgh legend,
right?
Of course. He just passed away a few years ago, which was sad. But Alan gets the credit for it, and of course the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is in Cleveland. Have you ever been there?
A couple times, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think of it?
There again, it's a product.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not going to find a little niche band, but. Yeah, I mean it's a fair representation of popular rock and roll. Did it
move you? Did it? You grew up listening to rock music,
sure?
Because it left me kind of cold.
Yeah,
I'll be honest with you.
The two things, standing there seeing Hendrix's crumpled lyrics for Purple Haze when it was called Purple Haze, Jesus Saves.
Yeah,
like he was working on the lyrics backstage, didn't like them, crumpled it up, threw it in a trash can. Chaz Chandler took them out of the trash can and thought somebody's going to want to see this someday. Wow, that was cool.
Very well anticipated, Mr. Chandler.
And seeing, and I'm not a big John Lennon fan, but seeing he drew some sort of comic book when he was like 12.
Yeah, I heard that story.
And when I was there, there was a thing that you could flip through the comic book and actually see it right in front of you. It was his sense of humor and sarcasm was so well developed at 12 years old that I cannot imagine the amount of damage done to him to make him that person at 12 years old.
Yeah.
The abandonment, his already seething at the very idea of authority.
Yeah.
Well,
you're kind of touching on something significant there because that's the kind of thing that goes into the attitude that is rock and roll.
Right.
And I know when I was a young kid, yes, it's a way of rebelling. against your parents. It becomes sort of a battle cry, for you. It wasn't accepted as mainstream, although that was before it was co-opted, and it became sanitized, taking it all the way up to the days of bands like Nickelback, who I really think killed rock and roll. I really do. And bands of that type.
It's not their fault. They were playing the best rock and roll they could.
Were they? Do you don't feel it was contrived? Do you think it was honest and it came to them?
Well,
because that's not the way it came off to me. I think that was part of the problem.
Yeah, and okay, and to me that band was Creed. That just seemed like
that was another one.
That 5 white guys in their 50s sat around a boardroom table and said, "We want a band that sounds dangerous, but isn't actually dangerous, and their lyrics sound macho, but they have a maybe a Christian bent, but maybe not. We don't want to, it was so carefully plotted out. And who knows, maybe a band like Nickelback was also.
Yeah. Creed was a very thinly veiled Christian band, weren't they?
I believe so.
Yeah, I think that they were. There was a lot of bands, and I guess what was this time period? I guess it was the 90s when I've heard them referred to as the faceless bands. See, because rock and roll was always, when I first started listening to it, I got into music really, really early. I was just a kid. I wasn't even 10 yet.
Yep.
I started listening to Motown and the Beatles. Motown and the Beatles. And then it's just certain individual pop songs that came on the radio that I loved. I can remember Petula Clark singing Downtown, or I can remember Paul Revere and the Raiders. Cherokee Nation. Who did the song Timothy? I remember that back.
Oh yeah, I love that song. Yeah.
About cannibalism.
Cannibalism in a mine. Yep.
Yeah. Oh no, we killed our mule and ate our mule. Our mule was called Timothy. No, dude, it was about cannibalism.
It was your buddy.
Yeah, we know.
Yeah, when I was a little kid, I remember being 6 or 7, and my 2 favorite songs were 5 O'Clock World and One by Three Dog Night.
I loved Three Dog Night back in the day.
And I got to thank my sister for all that, because she had a big record collection, and because she's 11 years older than I am, and she had this like the Stones and the Supremes, and all kind of stuff like that.
I didn't have anyone. I did not come from a musical family, so I discovered this all on my own. I was a musical person. Right. I got it from somewhere. I know that my grandparents on my father's side were artists and performers. Okay. My grandmother was a vaudevillian type of performer. She did, song and dance, and so I think maybe it came from that side of things. But yeah, I always loved just something about the Motown sound. Just really spoke to me. All of those artists, the Supremes and Smokey and the Temptations and the Jackson 5, and I loved all of that stuff. And of course, I heard the Beatles. Immediately liked them. I got turned on to the Beatles by my father. When we used to visit him on Sundays, he would play us the early Beatles records, Meet the Beatles. And I remember our babysitter from down the street used to listen to them too. So it was pretty obvious, there was something there that was worth liking and paying attention to. And no pretense, it just came to me honest. I just love this stuff.
That's cool.
So, and then I'll tell this story real quick. My parents belonged to the Columbia. I started listening to various kinds of music. Yeah. And, I was getting to be about 12 years old. And my parents belonged to the Columbia Record Club. You remember those guys?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you would pay 99 cents, you get 12 records.
Right.
But then you had to pay full list price, and you had a commitment that you had to buy so many over a period of time.
I used to love to joke from the stage that, hey, I just signed a contract with Columbia Records. And there'd be a little smattering of applause, and I'd say, and now all I have to do is buy 6 more albums at regular club prices to fulfill my commitment.
Well, one of the things that they were famous for doing, which I found out, was they would send you records that you did not order.
Oh, yeah.
So you had one of two choices. You either paid for those records, or you had to go through the trouble of sending them back.
Yeah.
So
good luck.
We got a package one day, and I opened it up. Probably shouldn't have, but I opened it up. There was 2 albums inside. One was a record called Machine Head. The other one was called Paranoid.
Wow.
And this is like 72, something
Right.
like that, something. And I didn't know what this was. I had no clue. I'm like, I'm going to listen to this. I put on Machine Head first. Absolutely life-changing experience. Okay, I went through puberty immediately. The whole thing ran the
Right.
gamut in 12 minutes.
Yep.
Just,
You were shaven by the end of the
oh my God.
first side.
Oh. I had no idea what I was hearing. I didn't know music could sound that way. And I didn't know what I was supposed to like about it.
Right.
Or not like about
Right.
it. But it really spoke to me. And, those, Richie's guitars and Ian's soaring voice. And, John Lord, who later I would find out that he put a Hammond B3 organ through a Marshall.
Right.
With distortion. It's like, who did that kind of thing? And obviously Black Sabbath, Paranoid was another, it was just a hugely influential record for me. But I have to say, nothing hit me as hard as Machine Head. And to this day, I would have to say Machine Head is my favorite record of all time. Just
Solid choice.
it was literally, people say this very casually, but that was a life-changing experience. That was my Beatles on Ed Sullivan story that changed my life here in Machine Head. And then it was off to the races from there. And I was buying records by Yes and Led Zeppelin and,
Because that life-changing experience opened your mind.
No, very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It didn't. And I believe the opposite thing happens with some people, that it just focuses them on, all I want is this. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes those people that are so stuck in one genre. And with other people, obviously, like yourself, it just opens up every door.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And part of it's a little fuzzy and hazy. I can't remember how I wound up discovering other artists. It's certainly that I don't think they were being played on the radio at the time. But I found out about...
But there was probably that kid at school that had a record.
Yeah.
And...
There were a couple records, though, that really changed... songs that I heard on the radio. You and I talked about this on our first podcast when you were here with... we came from space.
Okay.
You and Bill were here. But there was a couple... One of the songs I heard on the radio that just, kicked my ass so hard... And I had to call up the radio station and ask, who the hell is this? I need to know. And I went up and bought the record the next day, and that was Rocky Mountain Way by Joe Walsh.
Wow. Yeah.
That song still is one of the greatest rock songs of all time.
Yeah.
Right up there with another one of my anthems, my favorite anthems, something that personifies rock and roll for me, is All Right Now by Free. That I will always dearly love that song.
Has every element of a great rock song.
Everything. And I still think that Paul Rodgers is perhaps the greatest hard rock singer of all time. And Ian Gillan's certainly up there. Here's an interesting story. Apparently, when Ian first left Deep Purple, I guess, what album was that? Right before Burn, I guess. Yeah. And they wanted Paul Rodgers.
Oh, that would have been a natural.
They wanted Paul Rodgers to replace Ian Gillan. And Paul said, no, I've got my own thing that I'm doing now. And of course, that was Bad Company.
Right.
And, that's in the history books now too. But yeah, so, rock and roll got its start in the 50s. The 60s was like a mind-blowing time. I was a little too young to appreciate what was happening musically in the 60s. Like I said, I was into Motown and Beatles mode, but with the psychedelics and everything happening and sort of traditional freeform jazz artists like John Coltrane and Miles Davis, what they were doing and what they brought to rock and roll. I think that kind of jazz and psychedelics probably are what gave birth to what later would become progressive rock,
Yeah, don't you think? Yeah, especially the stuff that Miles was doing, Bitches Brew. Mm-hmm. You can see the link to Bitches Brew right into Maggot Brain by Parliament.
Parliament, yeah, sure.
That's psychedelia spread out over 8-9 minutes.
Yeah.
And then it's like, hey man, you're into prog territory,
Yeah.
And then you kind of take the fusion thing that Miles was doing and then import the pasty Anglo influences from England, you know, the Nice and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Keith Emerson. And
yeah.
boom, it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, you mix those up and there you are.
Good example. And I guess actually 1969 was the year that Court of the Crimson King came out.
Okay.
And that was kind of a prog supergroup already. But yeah, that was all born out of psychedelics and just experimental music that I really think came from Miles and Coltrane and people like that. But yeah, and then the 70s, that was my era. That was
me too. Yep.
That's the music that means the most to me to this day. You know, I don't like to appear to be the guy that just lives in the past, you know, musically. But it's everything happened in the 70s. I mean, just such good music, stuff that you heard for the first time because it was happening for the first time.
Right.
It only happens the first time once.
And that could be what's missing, is that classic rock radio is so big that I'm 54. Hey, I should be able to hear stuff. If I heard a great rock and roll song on the radio for the first time again, I would have that same feeling that I did the first time I heard Walk on the Wild Side, or the first time I heard
That was a great song.
Boys Are Back in Town.
Yeah.
You know, it's just not there. And that's one of those things. Radio doesn't excite people. Radio is very predictable for a reason.
Now, that's funny the way that you put that. So you have Thin Lizzy and Lou Reed.
Right.
I mean, they have nothing to do with each other musically, but you like them both.
Sure.
And so did I.
Yeah, because
It's not like that anymore.
Right, because because our minds were open to all of this stuff is cool. And it wasn't so genre specific then. It was all rock and roll. Like when I worked at a record store, I mean, Aerosmith and Anvil and everything, you know, we had a rock section, a country section, and a jazz blues section. And rock and roll was Thin Lizzy, Deep Purple. There wasn't alternative. There wasn't electronic. There wasn't, you know.
There was a rock section.
9 Inch Nails and Aerosmith they're just rock and roll. And Nitty Gritty Dirt Band and 9 Inch Nails are rock and roll.
Yeah, right.
You know.
We didn't say country rock. We didn't say southern rock. Well, we did say that, but it was all rock.
Right.
I always loved the Allman Brothers, and I always loved the band. And I always loved, you know, and of course I heard, you know, Lynyrd Skynyrd, and then later Molly Hatchet and the Outlaws, and you know, all that kind of stuff. Loved southern rock.
And those bands would be the distillation of a couple of other things, like, you know, Molly Hatchet was definitely, to me, like Skynyrd meets Savoy Brown. You know?
Yeah, okay,
and it's like, and it just turned into this southern hard rock, and then 20 years later, Corrosion of Conformity is Molly Hatchet and Sabbath, you know, and just because all of these
COC was from North Carolina, so they were kind of down there, and Molly Hatchet were Jacksonville, Florida boys, you know, just like Skynyrd came out of the same market. I think they came out of Jacksonville, but in the Allmans, and that was great, and we didn't care about the subgenres. You know, everyone's so concerned with putting a label on everything now.
Right.
And of course, things changed in the 80s. I mean, rock and roll became a real... first with punk and then with new wave and, you know, MTV. It became a fashion statement.
It became so image conscious. And I really don't blame the bands because, I mean, I bet that the boys in Duran Duran would have rather not put on makeup and puffy shirts.
Yeah, I mean, they really, it really was an image thing, and that's mainly MTV.
Right,
we had to blame for that.
And so right away, this image, and every image is transient. It's grit and talent and respect and chops that stay, and all those bands were. You know, if you just listened to them, objectively, they're a lot of pretty good bands.
Give me a for instance.
Like Duran Duran. If you just listened to them,
but they really were a pop band though. They weren't a rock band.
Pop, but they had they had a little bit of rock sensibility. You know, there was, the Taylor dude had some good guitar playing in there,
Yeah. Most of those bands I thought were very, very superficial and overly image conscious.
Well, that's
coming out of the 70s.
Right.
I didn't really warm up to new wave. Now I can listen to new wave just like I can listen to disco, which I despised in the 70s.
Sure.
But I can listen to it now and I can get it, and it's a nostalgia thing, I guess. I guess that's what it is. But those bands,
and there were great pop lyrics to those new wave songs.
yeah, and there were some bands that were called new wave,
Right.
which I hated that term, but they were really good, serious rock. Okay,
The Cars got called new wave.
The Cars and the Police, two great examples. Those bands kicked ass.
Yep.
On every level.
Yep.
Great rock bands. Put them alongside any of the great rock bands in history, and they belong there. They absolutely.
Joe Jackson was called new wave.
I love Joe Jackson.
Joe Jackson's not new wave. He just came out in 77 or 78 when, to be, there again, you got to fall into a genre starting right around then. So have to be
right
new
around
wave.
when the new wave thing
Right.
started, and then MTV really hammered it hit home. But Joe Jackson was, not an attractive looking guy. That wasn't an image thing.
No.
Had the baddest bass player I had ever heard, in a long time with Graham Maybe. And look how he evolved over the years with his records.
Right.
With Day and Night, is that where? And Jump and Jive, which was
he would explore.
Swing.
Yeah, he would explore these other interests.
Yeah.
And Elvis Costello, the same thing.
Same thing. Great songwriter.
Yep.
I'll tell you two other bands that I loved that they were considered new wave, but I thought that timeless music was Squeeze
I was just gonna say, yeah.
and XTC.
Yep.
Amazing bands, just on the songwriting, the playing. There was a sensibility there that was very serious. I was just listening to Squeeze's greatest hits the other day, and it's the same. There was a lot of, I guess, what you can call new wave tropes, sonically in the music. But if you just listen to the underlying songs, there was some real, real creativity going on there, genuine. And then, of course, songs like Black Coffee in Bed and Tempted. I mean, those are R&B and harking back to Motown.
100%.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, just great stuff.
And then like the genre game continued. The Cult was called alternative. The Cult's a rock and roll band.
Well, they started out as Southern Death Cult,
right?
And then they became the Death Cult, and then the Cult. By the time they became the Cult, and they got like Rick Rubin or Bob Rock, I can't remember.
No, Rick Rubin did Electric,
yeah. They became a different band. So at some point, I failed to mention this right at the beginning of the show, but we're going to have a little special guest here that we're going to bring in on the telephone. Good friend of mine from for many, many years, RICHIE RANNO from the band Starz. Starz was signed to Capitol Records. They did 5 albums for Capitol Records. They came out in 1976, I think was their first album. And I saw those guys play at the Stanley Theater. They did a free show. And never heard of them before, but I got free tickets because it was free. WDE and Capitol Records paid for it. And I went down and I bought the record the next day, went out and loved the performance, went out and bought the record the next day. And as I mentioned to you before, within a week, I was like 4 songs from that album, the first Starz album, I was playing in the band that I was in.
Right.
We were already covering those songs.
And there again, good old T-shirt and jeans rock and roll will always find an audience.
It wasn't T-shirt and jeans rock and roll, though. Starz was pretty flamboyant. They had... they wore costumes.
But don't you think weren't you standing there with T-shirt and jeans on? You know
I
what I'm
was.
saying?
Yeah. I certainly was. Yeah. But those guys, as a matter of fact, but RICHIE RANNO from Starz is going to join us here in just a moment here. And I'll let him tell the story. But I believe, do you remember Patti LaBelle's first band? They were called LaBelle.
LaBelle, yeah.
You remember the costumes they used to wear?
Oh yeah, they were like Kiss.
Outer Space.
Yeah.
That's the same designer that did LaBelle's costumes did Starz costumes. the 7-inch heels, and Starz was managed by Bill Aucoin, who managed Kiss. So it was all part of that Kiss family, Rocksteady management. And Rich has some great stories about that, but he's been a very dear friend for years, and he's got some great stories to tell. So I'm going to bring Rich in here. We're going to take a quick break here, and then I'm going to get Richie on the phone with Dave and I, and then we'll continue our conversation about the great days of rock and roll. Where did they go? So we'll be right back.
Bogus Productions presents the largest rock festival in concert history. Over 700 national rock groups will perform on a 22-acre revolving outdoor stage for 18 days and nights. Plus, you'll witness the cancellation of these incredible groups: Led Zeppelin, The Who, Peter Frampton, The Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, and more. Arrangements are being made for a triple LP, a movie, t-shirts, bumper stickers, posters, and matchbook covers, so don't miss it. The biggest, best rock festival in concert history. Advance tickets are only $85, $110 at the gate, cash only, no refunds. Notice, this is the last time a rock festival of this size will ever be held. To prevent a possible festival injunction, the concert site will be announced 6 hours before showtime. So be listening and get your tickets now. Attendance is limited to the first 3 million ticket holders. A bogus production.
Okay, welcome back to Don't Quit Your Day Job. I'm here with Dave Buzard, and as promised, as threatened, I now have on the phone with us Rich Ranno from the band Starz, calling in from Fair Lawn, New Jersey. Richie, thanks for joining us. How you doing?
Anytime, Curly.
We were joking about this before. I did a little a preamble before we brought you on the phone and explain how I became a Starz fan and how I met you and stuff. But and you're part of Rocksteady management, and you were with Bill Aucoin and the whole Kiss thing. Give us the Ace freely, man. Just give me a couple seconds of Ace. Just you got it.
Well, Ace is my good friend for many, many, many years. 40, 50 years. If it's 50 years, I know it's over 45, though. I can tell you that. And so, because I've gotten to know him so well, I can kind of talk like him a little bit every now and then, but not much. You know what I'm saying, Carly? I know him really good. We're good friends.
I talked about the first time that we saw you guys in Pittsburgh was at the Stanley Theater. You guys did a live free show, which was completely packed, completely sold out. There was broadcast.
So we were going to give the album away too, but we just thought that was a little much. We just did the free show.
Well, I wish you would have done that. I could have saved the money. I went out and bought the record the next day. But it was a great show. I still remember it vividly. HP Rock, a local Pittsburgh band, opened for you guys, and ABC TV was there filming.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and you were broadcast live on WDV, which is our local rock station here in Pittsburgh, and I became a fan. And you and I wound up meeting years later when I moved to New York, and
that's right.
Yeah, that was you called. If I recall the story correctly, you called Mechanic Records, which was an MCA subsidiary that I was working at the time in New York. And I happened to answer the phone, and you asked to speak to Steve Sinclair, who was our president of the company at the time. And I'm like, who's calling, please? Oh, it's just Rich Ranno. Rich Ranno from Starz?
That's right. What was I calling that label for?
I don't know. You got to tell me. I don't know why you were calling.
The only thing I could think of was I was producing the Sweet Pain album, the group Sweet Pain.
Yeah, Corky Gunn. Yeah.
Yeah, I maybe that was it. I don't remember really. I thought you were at Metal Blade, and I was calling Metal Blade.
Well,
but
no,
maybe
no, that was before I worked at Metal Blade. I was only there for a short time. But you know what? Now that makes sense because Corky, Sweet Pain was on Combat Records, and Steve used to run Combat Records before he started Mechanic.
That's right, he did. Yeah, I still don't know why I was calling, but I was friends with Steve at the time, so anything's possible.
And then you guys wound up doing a deal with Metal Blade years later, right?
Who did?
You did, or who? The Starz reissues did come out on Metal Blade Records at one point.
Yeah, but they'd already come. I think they came out in like 1991.
Oh, that was
so
much,
when was that I called you? I don't know what year that.
That was about 80, 86, 87, something like that.
Oh, okay. All right.
Sometime in there. And that's when I was just moving out to Bergenfield, New Jersey.
Right.
And you said, I live in Bergenfield, New Jersey.
That's right. You live 2 blocks away from me.
Exactly. And the rest is history.
That's right. That's so funny, right?
As they say, yeah. But so how did you started telling me about this. As long as we've known each other, I didn't really know how you guys got together. Can you go over that story again real quick?
The Starz story?
Right, because you came from the band Stories with Ian Lloyd in the song Brother Louie.
Yes, Brother Louie.
And the rest of the guys.
Do you want to sing a little bit of that for me? Brother Louie?
Dave will. Dave?
Jim already hipped me to some of it. I mean, I know it, but I mean, Jim's version was so good.
Well, we can sing Brandy, which the rest of the guys came from the band Looking Glass, which of course.
That's right. Well, now you're giving the whole thing away. You're starting to give it away. The story.
Okay. Well, the story's story.
Yeah, story. Well, the story was. All right, so Story split up, and I went off with Ian Lloyd, and we did Ian Lloyd's solo project for a few months, and then I quit the Ian Lloyd thing just because the drummer was doing ridiculous amounts of drugs in the studio, and I just said I'd had enough of people doing drugs around me at that point, and to this point, today, I don't like people doing drugs around me or in my bands, so I quit, and Mick Jones replaced me, and he was putting together another band that you may have
Jones
heard of.
from Foreigner?
Well, he wasn't from Foreigner, but he was putting Foreigner together at that exact time. So he recruited our buddy Ian McDonald, who was in that band. And I went off and I started playing with the New York Rock and Roll Ensemble guys. Oh. And you said you didn't remember them, right?
I don't. Dave sounds like he does. Do you remember those guys?
Yeah. So it was all the guys from New York Rock and Roll Ensemble except for the keyboard player Michael Kamen. And we were trying to put something together, and it wasn't really working out too great.
And we talked about Michael Kamen, who went on to become a really successful film composer, and in fact, he did some orchestration for Metallica too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know, but I know he was David Bowie's keyboard player for a while through the 70s. So also,
I didn't know that. I didn't know that about Michael.
Yeah.
So that'd be before Mike Garrison, I guess.
And well, anyway, so we tried that for a while, and then. I had already become friends with Kiss from the very beginning there because Kerner and Wise, Kenny Kerner and Richie Wise, produced Stories, and they produced the first 2 Kiss albums. So through them, basically, and through a complete fluke of staying at the same hotel on Sunset Strip in Hollywood, I became friends with the guys in Kiss, and those guys had heard me. They came to the Stories gig, and I was really into. I just loved that first album, and that was the only album that was out by them at that point. And so we had a good time. Backstage, I was playing Kiss songs and on my guitar, and we were all singing them together. I mean, the 4 guys in Kiss and myself. It was a lot of fun. And the next day at the hotel, they said, you should quit this group. You're a great hard rock guitar player, and our manager is looking for another hard rock group to manage. I said, the group's got a #1 record, so I'm not quitting. But now, once the group did split up, and once I got out of Ian's solo thing, I was trying to put something together that I could take to Rocksteady Management, which was Bill O'Coin. I thought it was a good idea, but I just wasn't coming together. So my guitar roadie, Tom Butler, he was my guitar roadie in Stories, and he lived in the city, in New York City, and he would read the Village Voice every week, and he saw an ad for a Rocksteady Management band looking for a guitar player. And he called me up. He was like all excited. He said, Richie, this is perfect for you. He said, you were talking about doing this, But, when you have a good guitar roadie, they're like, they're always looking out for you, even when they're not working with you. You know what I mean? It's like we were good buddies,
That's
so
how
looking
it should
out
be.
For me.
That's how it should be.
Right.
Yeah, he was a great guy. I don't know. I haven't spoken to him in years. I don't know what happened to him. But this was 100 years ago, or 150 years ago, maybe. And so he said, here's the number, call him right away. So I said, yeah, you're right. So I call him up, and a guy answers the phone, and he goes, kind of arrogant, and he goes, are you the greatest rock guitar player ever? I said, probably not.
Number 3, anyway.
Yeah, what are you supposed to say to that? Yes, I am. So I just said, I don't know, probably not. And he said, well, then we don't need you. He goes to me. I said, oh, okay. I said, well, then what are you talking about? He goes, because we already have the greatest rock and roll guitar player. I said, yeah, so you're right. You don't need me. So he goes, but we're looking for two of them. Oh. I said, well, yeah. Now, normally I would have hung up the phone instantly, but because, it was associated with Kiss and Rocksteady, and I had my mind set on going to try and do something with that organization there, I hung on the phone, and he said, yeah, he goes, all right, well, then come on down. I said, yeah, okay. And I'm thinking, oh, God. So he gave me a time slot like the next day, and I was telling Jim, I even brought my girlfriend. I never bring, that's not professional. I normally didn't do things like that, I should say. But I didn't even want to go. So I said, come with me, So I bring her. She's beautiful blonde, and they're all looking at her, and he goes, Sean, it was Sean Delaney, by the way, was the guy who greeted me at the door, and he was the guy who had been on the phone. And I'm sure you guys know the legend of Sean Delaney.
Oh, Sean went on, and he was responsible. Well, legend has it he was responsible for a lot of the staging, the costuming, that
Absolutely.
side of Kiss. That was Sean's brainstorming.
Absolutely. He even choreographed the front cover of the Kiss Alive album. He told me at the Michigan Palace. He told me he did that. Or it could have been Cobo Hall, but I think it was the Michigan Palace.
I think it was Cobo Hall. It was Cobo Hall.
Yeah, might have been Cobo Hall, yeah. And he actually, he said they weren't actually playing when that picture was taken. Right. He just, situated them. And, he was great. He was a guy with a vision, and he was had a lot of energy. But on that particular day, I wanted to kill him. And he said, so, who's this girl? I said, it's my girlfriend. He goes, she can't be here. I said, she's already here. He goes, well, she can't be here. Now, normally I would have just walked out the door and said, fuck you, because that's the kind of person I am. But I kept thinking in my head, Kiss, Kiss, right. Rocksteady, I got to see this through. So they, whisked her off somewhere. I don't know. I didn't know exactly where at the time. And I thought
she went to
really
see Gene.
So then I sat there for a few minutes, and then they said, okay, it's time for you to go in. I said, yeah, okay. So I walked into this little rehearsal studio area. Nobody looked at me. None of the five. There were five guys in the band at that point because they had a keyboard player, and they were called the Fallen Angels. And nobody looked at me, and I walked in, and I just looked around, and the other guitar player, Brendan Harkin, said, cable's on the floor. I just pointed over. I said, yeah. And I plugged it in. And then they just went, 1, 2, and I went, maybe a song title, key, anything. Hey, they yell. I said, okay. And I'm thinking to myself, I just want to walk out of here. This sucks. I'll never forget my thoughts because I've told these guys the story. They don't really remember it because they don't remember it that way because it wasn't that important to them. And they had already auditioned 75 guys. So they start playing, and I said, okay, it kind of sounds like a mountain song. I'll play like Leslie West. It's funny how you remember thoughts all these years later. But, and that's what I did. I kind of played like Leslie West, and we played maybe a minute and a half, and then they all stopped playing. I said, oh, now what? I'm thinking to myself. And then now they're all looking at me, and they said, so what's your name? So now I tell them my name, and they said, so what have you done? I said, well, I was in Stories, and they said, we were the Looking Glass.
Wow.
I said, oh, that's pretty weird. So they said, yeah, you just played exactly what we wanted somebody to come in and do, and no one's done it. I said, oh, well, that's pretty cool. And they said, yeah, let's play a couple more minutes. So we played a couple more minutes, and everything went well. And then they literally didn't even discuss it amongst themselves. They just said, you want to be in the band?
So they were looking for somebody with a bit of a pedigree that you came from Stories.
I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
So they were looking for somebody with a bit of a pedigree that you had Stories in your background, and they had success with Brandy and Looking Glass. So they were looking.
I don't know how much that influenced anything. I think not having experience always helps, but they just were looking for someone who could play that style. And what a lot of people don't realize is that New York City was not a rock and roll mecca. It was not. The Midwest was where rock was the mecca. And I had lived there for 3 years, and I was, hanging out with Ted Nugent, Bob Seger, Cheap Trick, you name it, REO Speedwagon. Those were the rock groups.
Yep.
And I had a great time out there, and I loved the music out there. And I came out here, and it just didn't exist. So, looking for a rock guitarist in New York City in 1975 was looking for a needle in a haystack, but it worked out, So, I know it seems weird. People think of New York City rock music.
No, because I remember when Kiss really started making it big, and Gene always used to tout the fact that yeah, they were the first big rock band to come out of New York City. And I'm like, how can that be? But
Yeah,
I guess they kind of were. You had guys from like Long Island and in New Jersey, like the Rascals and things like that, but they weren't from New York City.
And they weren't really guitar rock groups, if you think about it, both of those groups.
No.
You know, there were 8 million people, and we were the best.
That's it. Yeah. So it all worked out, and Sean and I became great friends after that, and he was just an incredible guy. He really was. He was at every rehearsal we did for the first, writing rehearsal type thing for the first 6 months, and that's what happened.
And I was telling this to Dave before. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys, I don't know if Sean had anything to do with this. I imagine that he did, but you guys had the same costume designer that LaBelle had, right?
Oh, no.
Really? I thought you told...
No, the confusion is that when I was in Stories, I went to Larry Legaspi's store called Moonstone, and I only last week was able to remember that guy's name because somebody was grilling me about it. I couldn't remember it. It finally hit me. Larry Legaspi. He was on Christopher Street in the Village. Yeah. And a friend of mine knew about his store and said, you have to come down and see this guy's designs. So I went there when I was in Stories, late 1973 it had to be. And I bought this crazy shirt top thing, kind of like it was like more than a shirt. It was weird, and it was the space thing. I mean, it's exactly what Ace wore. Well, just slightly different than what Ace ended up wearing.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, but before Ace did it, with the silver circles, and it was actually filled with foam. I still have mine. Hanging on a hanger, and I bought it, and I said to the guys, I wore it in Stories. I think I wore it on American Bandstand, in fact, and I said to the guys in Stories, we got to all do this. This is going to be really cool. But no one agreed with me. And then not too long after that, LaBelle and Kiss all had the same crap. And I said, I told you guys, but they didn't listen to me. But I didn't wear that in Starz.
Now we got the straight story. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we were talking about tonight. The topic tonight is rock dead. You and I talked about this a little while ago on the phone, and the main thing is most of our idols are. Let's face it, we're getting older. Some of them are dying off. It's a very sad thing. But who's the new rock stars? I mean, that flamboyance of people like Robert Plant.
I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is that you have to know kids 25 and under, and I have 2 kids 25 under 25, and I teach kids guitar, and I teach kids from like 14 to 21, and those are the few kids that actually listen to guitar rock, but their friends don't. They're like the rare kid at school, and the media is a tremendous brainwashing machine.
Yes.
And at some point, it started brainwashing kids to like rap music. Now, rap music is really that you can't really use those 2 words together. We'll just call it rap entertainment. Rap entertainment would be the fair thing to call it. And you can like it or not. It's and my one student told me he's 21. He puts rock music on around his friends, and his friends say, "Shut that crap off," because it's not getting into their brain. But
sounds familiar.
It's probably not much different than when rock and roll came out originally.
Right.
And all that big band sound, I mean, to me, to this day, I can't stand that stuff. It has no meaning to me whatsoever, the big band era.
Right.
And we just, my generation, and you're part of that generation, wiped that music out. And this generation is wiping out our music, which may be completely fair. You know what I'm saying? Every generation comes up with its own thing. Now, I think it's brainwashing to some degree, but they still have a choice, and if they prefer hearing that garbage, which is exactly what our parents said rock music was, you know what I'm saying? So it just is what it is, but it's amazing that rock music actually is holding on to some degree, but I notice more and more the crowds are older and older. And they're not being filled in by young people. To a small degree they are, but not a large enough degree. But there are some young rock groups. And the Black Keys, and I guess they're getting a little older themselves, but the Black Keys play like a bluesy rock, really cool rock sound that people really love, and they're very popular. So
we were talking about the guys that you can consider them to be rock stars. Probably the last great rock star that we have, and Dave and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, is probably Dave Grohl and the Foo Fighters. I mean, I think I am. I think I am the last one. Well, that's a given. That's a given. It goes without saying.
Yeah, Dave Grohl. That's a good choice. Yeah.
Who else? I mean, who else is there outside of? Nobody's got the flamboyance of people like Elton John and Robert Plant and Bowie and Steven Tyler. I mean, where are those guys? That's gone. That's gone.
I guess there's no market for it. Those guys may be out there, but no one's buying it.
Or if they're doing it in some kind of retro kitschy way, the way that
Jack White. When you say retro kitschy,
yeah,
and it's like he's a presence, but he.
I think. Look, we did a couple of gigs in San Antonio. Starz did last year, and there was this group that opened up for us, and I told you this, Jim. Jason Kane and the Jive.
Yeah, I checked them out.
They're phenomenal. Rock group, phenomenal. Jason is tremendously talented. Got the real long hair, plays like the greatest rock guitar. The kid is amazing. The songs are great. And if they can get heard, but see, that's part of that brainwash machine. There's no real machine for promoting that kind of music.
Well, there's no real rock movement anymore. There's
right.
What is really happening today? I mean, you had metal, you had psychedelic, you had progressive rock, you had new wave, you had all these different. They were actual movements. There's nothing like that in rock anymore. I mean, there's not that I can think of, anyways. It's sad.
I can't disagree. I can't disagree with that. There's no real radio stations, but see, the whole media system is completely different. It's almost impossible to understand what it actually is these days. Like, where are people getting their information from? They're getting it from a billion places. It used to be very controlled, that it was all radio. And then it went from radio. Music was radio. A little bit of TV, but radio. There was only like one show on TV at 11:30 at night till 1 o'clock in the morning, on Saturday or Friday.
I mean, I remember the first time I saw Kiss was on ABC's In Concert.
In concert, that didn't last too long.
Yeah,
but then Don
Kirshner, and you had the Midnight Special.
And Midnight Special, those were the three,
Mm-hmm.
So then slowly, then cable became a slow, emerging factor. And then someone came up with MTV, which I thought was, what the hell does that mean? But look what happened, nobody. It's so then. All right, so then the MTV thing was like really big in the '80s, and then. But radio is still a big factor. But now radio is not a factor, and neither is MTV. It's in little bits of everything now. The Internet is big, but the Internet is wide, and, are millions of people going to one spot? Probably not. If you go to YouTube has got a billion things on it. How does a rock group make headway that people can find them? The incorrect theory is, everyone's equal on YouTube. That's absolutely not true. It's the same thing as it always was. It's the big money advertising and the publicity agent who gets you on every TV station and in every magazine, and then you go to YouTube and watch it.
Yeah,
so,
YouTube is definitely changing. It's a great outlet. It's a double-edged sword, though, because, yes, you can get exposure for yourself on YouTube. You can find an audience there.
Who's going to watch you?
Yeah, because you've got a million other choices. That's the problem.
No one's going to listen. I can put up the best video that ever was made with the best song ever, and no one's going to watch it because no one knows who I am anymore. It's not like
right.
So no one's. Believe me, I've got some pretty good stuff up there. It's got 10 hits.
Yeah, but you guys got a following. I mean, you've
got. I'm not referring to Starz.
Oh,
I'm not referring to Starz. I'm referring to like if I do something new, which I do occasionally.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, so I don't know what the answer is. And Starz is just nostalgia, at this point.
It is nostalgia, but you guys are still going. I mean, I wanted to make that clear. You guys just did a bunch of shows with Angel. And
we did 12 shows. It was great. And one was with Ace, actually.
And with Ace, yeah, that's right, yeah. So how did that show? How did it all go? I mean, everything good with you and Ace, and I mean,
Oh, of course, yeah.
now,
You know,
what was-
Ace and I really, we have a very long history together, you know, and I actually ran his 50th birthday party for, I think we had 500 people. And
yeah, I was there.
He had, what was that?
I was there.
It was insane.
Yeah,
It was insane.
isn't that
yeah.
when we? Isn't that the day? Wait a minute, were we talking about the same thing when we had the bomb threat?
Yeah, were you with me on that?
I was there.
No, then I don't have to tell you how that was. Yeah,
We
we
had
had
to
bomb
clear-
threat. We had to clear the place.
We had to clear the
bomb
place.
squad
They
came
brought the bomb dogs in to sniff.
Oh, God. You were there. It was
Now,
insane.
do you remember what else happened that day? You got to tell that story when everybody started going nuts. And what's going on? What's going on? Do you remember what happened?
You talking about Gene?
Yeah.
Yeah, Gene showed up. We gave him the custom-made Les Paul cake, birthday cake.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
My son and I, my oldest son and I, handed Gene the cake and said, Ace is not in a real good mood right now. And he said, fuck you, he said to me. And I said, you're on your own. And I let him walk in.
As I remember it, I was working the front door for you, I think, at that thing.
Yeah, you were.
Because I used to work at
You
the
were,
Kiss.
that's
I used
right.
to do the Kiss New York. You did the New York Kiss convention every year, and you and I worked together. I worked for
Right.
you on that.
Yeah.
But
Yes, that's right.
But I think what happened was Ace was doing an interview thing from the stage,
That's right.
and he had some rather unkind things to say about Gene.
You're right.
And Gene, somebody must have told Gene, so Gene said, "I'm going to come down there."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and as I remember, tell me if I'm wrong about this, but as I remember it, Gene just walked up, handed Ace the cake,
Right.
gave him a hug, and then turned around and walked out.
No, because what happened was
That's what
it's
I remember.
close though.
Yeah.
What
Okay.
happened was I let him walk up there alone because he pissed me off. But not many people realized it was Gene Simmons because it was so out of context, you know. And as he got up close to the table there, I said to my son, maybe we should go up there just in case Ace punches him, you know, just kind of, because I know Ace was pretty angry with him from what he was saying.
Yeah.
So we got up pretty close. And then at one point I said, I think we better back up. There may be cake flying soon. So, but what happened was Gene continually was talking to Ace, and Ace was signing autographs and wouldn't look up at Ace. I wouldn't look up at Gene and wouldn't say a word to him. He just kept signing autographs, and Gene finally just put his hands up and said, okay. By now, a lot of people knew it was Gene, and he started to walk out. And then, I didn't have much security there. You know, it was just a handful of us.
Yeah,
And I said, I guess we're going to have to, protect Gene from, like, getting completely mauled here. And the crowd was pretty polite, don't get me wrong. But, yeah, and we escorted him out. And I should have said, fuck you, Gene, but I didn't do that. But it was all right. I didn't care what he said. It didn't bother me. It was just kind of funny. I was just giving him a heads up, you know. But, yeah, it was a funny scene, yeah. I didn't think it was really at that point that Ace was now officially out of Kiss, the reunion, the reunited Kiss.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That was his birthday was the official, and Gene showing up was the official parting of the ways.
What? So he never played with Kiss again after that? I thought that he
I
did.
don't think did he come back to them? I don't know. I don't think so.
I'm a little fuzzy on the chronology of the whole
Yeah,
thing.
I am too. I am too. I kind of lost interest in following what was going on after that.
Yeah, that was an interesting day, man. The bomb threat was the pièce de résistance. So that was crazy.
Yeah,
That was
crazy.
I don't know did they ever find out who called in the bomb threat?
No, they located some payphone on Route 46 in Lodi. That's all they could do. And back in those days, there were no cameras out. Maybe they would have found the person if they were, but I don't know who the hell would do that. But
My money's on
somebody did.
Vinnie Vincent.
Isn't Vinny a woman now?
Vincenza.
No, seriously, isn't Vinny's? Didn't Vinny have a sex change reassignment?
I'm not saying he's a woman, but he does wear pantsuits a lot these
Now,
days.
who said that, Jim or Dave?
Well, Dave just said the thing about the pantsuit. So
Okay,
I
so
know
it's on you guys. I'm not saying anything. I just want to make sure everyone knows that.
We all have to go on record now. Who says what?
Yeah, that's
right.
We're on record. I said nothing.
You're on record as telling Gene Simmons to go fuck himself, though.
No, I didn't tell him that. He told me to go fuck myself.
Oh, that was Gene that said that? Okay.
Yeah, Gene said to me and my son. I thought it was a little rude. My son
That's
was... How old was Chip
really?
back then? I was about 18. He was about 22.
That is rude. That is really rude.
Wow.
Yeah, it was weird. I don't know where that came from, but whatever.
Well, he was mad at Ace. He wasn't mad at you, I don't think.
Yeah, probably. He was probably upset with Ace, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
So
just
what-
projecting right now, but fuck you.
Exactly. I do that all the time, actually.
You used to play me when Gene would call
By
you.
the way, Jim.
Yeah.
I'm kind of angry with my wife right now. Fuck you. See, it's a natural thing.
And you feel better, and she
Yeah, I
doesn't,
do,
and she doesn't feel worse.
And I didn't have to say fuck you to my wife. Save me.
So where do we go from here, man? What's going on with Starz from this point on? What are you guys going to be up to?
Well, we have an agent now, which is the first time we reunited in 2003. So in 16 years, we never had an agent. I had to do all the bookings myself, and I kind of got sick of doing that. So that's why we haven't been playing that much. But we recently got an agent this year, and she booked those 12 shows for us. She's really great. She said there's a few more coming up in the Midwest in maybe November. We're just waiting to hear if it gets confirmed or not. And if it doesn't, it'll just be pushed back maybe to the spring or something.
We got to
No
get
one
you.
really wants.
We got to get you to come to Pittsburgh. I mean, seriously.
Yeah, no question. I love Pittsburgh.
I think
always did great.
I've seen you here. I saw you do the free show. Then I saw you with the Pat Travers band and Crack the Sky.
Wow,
yeah,
what a
did you see it with
lineup!
Rush?
Oh yeah.
What a lineup!
And I saw you with Rush. Yeah, you opened
Yeah,
for
that
Rush.
that was a really fun show. We did a good portion of that Rush Hemispheres tour. That was their first headlining tour, and those guys are the nicest guys in rock, And there's a lot of great, nice people, but they were just so nice. And they said, we sold out every show, and we really feel that you guys helped us by being on the bill, and they treated us
that's great.
really, really well.
That's
They're
great.
just nice guys.
Yeah, I've had some dealings with them, and they are very nice people.
They're very
the whole
down to
camp.
earth, good people,
I remember that show when it was at the Civic Arena at the time, and
Yeah.
I'll never forget this. I saw Michael, your lead singer, come out with one of your roadies, and he was pointing out girls in the audience,
Yeah.
pointing out which girls he wanted to have come backstage.
Yeah, and they did come back, and Michael and I were
Yeah.
talking with them about their future.
Yes, you were just talking.
Immediate future.
Yes, and they seem to have a pretty bright future, I thought. I wish I could remember their names, because I'm sure they're very successful today.
Well, now that we've tackled this situation here with getting you on the phone so we can actually record you on the show, you and I have been planning on doing a dedicated show to talk about some things. So now I'd like to do that like in the next couple of weeks if you're going to be available.
I'm not available, no.
That's so.
Now that he has an agent, he is no longer available.
Jim,
Yes.
fuck you. Yeah, absolutely, of course.
You're too
Jim,
late, Rich. I've been fucked for years.
Dave, if you don't already know this, Jim is one of my best friends for the last since we met on the phone at Mechanic Records. We became just the best of friends, and
Richie, it sounded like you might have just misdialed the phone that day and ended up with a best friend
Yeah,
for
I know.
life. Yeah. There's worse
Yeah.
things that can happen, I guess, but
Yeah, exactly. I was trying to call Metal Blade.
that's right.
Yeah, you got
Mechanic metal. You fat fingered
And
it
you
and got a best friend.
And then I wound up working for Metal Blade anyways. So
That's right. Yeah.
so
did.
so there you go. Yes, I did. And then I was at Metal Blade for just a short time, and then that's when I got the job at Columbia Records. And that's a whole other story, but we'll get into that some other time. Well, Rich, thanks, man. It was great to have you on, and we're going to do a full show coming up in the next couple of weeks, you and I, and get into some really heavy stuff about the business of the music business and some of the things that happened to you with your management, with your record company, your publishing, some problems that you had, and things to look out for.
I think we've told some of those stories too. Can I plug Doug Broad?
Yeah, whatever you want. Sure.
Doug Broad is. Have you heard of him? Do you know Doug?
I don't know Doug. I don't.
So he was a writer for Spin when he first started off in the music business,
Sure.
and he stayed involved in rock and roll music journalism, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
And he decided to do a book on basically his 4 favorite bands, but also 4 bands we felt were extremely influential on the next generation of bands. So those 4 bands are Kiss, Aerosmith, Cheap Trick, and Starz.
Wow.
So he got a publishing deal to do it, and he's been interviewing all kinds of people, and he seems to know what he's doing. So I think it's going to be a pretty cool thing when he puts it out, and hopefully you will produce the movie.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Dude, from your lips to God's ears, or whoever might be listening to this. Hopefully we'll have a couple of people listening to this podcast. We'll see. But now that I have like big name guests like Richie Ranno on the show, I think we might have a better chance. But yeah, no, I used to read about you guys all. The whole rock journalism thing is something I want to touch on in our next show. But I used to read about Starz all the time in Circus Magazine and in Rock Scene. Was it not Rock Scene?
Yeah,
I'm
Rock
sorry.
Scene. Well, there
Rock
was some
Scene
great magazines.
Cream was
Super
the one.
Rock.
I don't remember Super Rock. It was Circus, Hit Parader, Rock Scene, and Cream. Yeah. Those are the ones that I read on a regular.
But Cream and
Then there was
Circus
that
seem to be
shitbag
Starz
Rolling
friendly.
Stone.
Cream and Circus were definitely Starz friendly. Yeah. No, Rolling Stone. I don't remember reading about you guys in Rolling Stone, but
Oh yeah, every now and then they would say something nasty about us, but yeah.
And then we could talk about the bands that you influenced too, like Motley Crue lists Starz as one of their biggest influences.
Yeah, well, sure. There's a whole slew of them that have actually told me about how influential we were on their careers, on what their future vision was, which was very nice to hear,
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. Well, Bud, thank you so much for joining us. I will be back in touch over the next couple of days, and we're going to have you back on the show. And thanks for your time, Rich. It was good talking to you.
Hey, thank you, guys. Dave, nice to meet you on the phone.
Nice to meet you too. Will you give Jim one more fuck you before you go?
Well, I do want to say one thing to both of you. Fuck both of you.
That's a privilege, man. That's great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I got that off my chest. I was mad at somebody else.
You feel better.
Yes.
Yeah.
As soon as we're done with this, we're done with this show, I'm going to call your wife and tell her what she said.
Yeah, tell her you're mad at me. Fuck you.
Tell
That's how it works.
Give my love to Bethany and the kids, and tell them I said hello.
I will. Thank you.
All right. Take care, Rich.
Good night, Rich.
All right. Bye-bye.
Han, the Pattersons are coming over, and we only have about enough grass left to roll one joint.
Oh, that's okay, Ted. I'll just mix it up real good with this.
Hey, what are you doing?
I'm making marijuana helper.
Marijuana helper?
That's right. With Pillsbury's new marijuana helper, there'll be enough of this Colombian to go around for everybody. And look, marijuana helper makes our dope look as rich and potent as the best red bud.
Marijuana helper.
Now you can get as much as 3 ounces from every ounce you buy, thanks to Pillsbury's new marijuana helper.
Honey, you're a genius.
There. Now put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Pillsbury's new marijuana helper from the makers of Angel Dust Cake. Pillsbury.
It really works.
All right, we're back again. Thanks again to Rich Ranno for joining us on the show. And Dave and I were just talking over the break here real quick and getting into it. We started talking about the new wave thing. I dismissed. It's easy to dismiss new wave, excuse me, because of the whole image thing that we were talking about.
Right.
It was driven by MTV and stuff. And I mentioned some of the bands that I thought were very legitimate, like Squeeze and The Police, and Mr. Mister was another one. But and I love Psychedelic Furs. But you mentioned we both were big Missing Persons fans.
Missing Persons, great band.
Incredible band.
Would have been they were a great rock band with 80s production, but they would have been a great band in the 70s with 70s production, 90s with 90s production. They had good players and good songs.
Lots of guys that came from Zappa.
Right.
So I think Warren, Patrick O'Hearn, and Terry.
Of course, yeah. Terry.
All came from Frank Zappa.
And I think Dale even makes an appearance in, 200 Hotels or 2,000 Hotels?
Does she?
Yeah.
200 Hotels.
Something like that.
She's in that movie. I didn't know that.
I think
she made an appearance in Hustler magazine,
She
which I'll
did.
never forget.
which I will never forget.
Oh, yeah. Dale was. She was a good-looking lady.
When I saw Jeff Beck and Stevie Ray Vaughan at the Palumbo Center, I snuck down front, and the smell of this perfume was one of the best smelling women I've ever smelled in my entire life. And I look down, and I'm standing right beside Dale Buzard, because she's like,
well, you'd
5'1".
have to look down because she's tiny.
Yeah,
She's a tiny little
and I was like, and she just looked up at me like, what a creep, But I'm like, man, you smell great.
That's a great story, Dave. I don't quite know how to follow that one, but
it can just lay out there. It has no end. It's one of those.
Yeah, but they were great. The Cure was another band that I thought was just a great band. Definitely image heavy, but I dug those guys. And the Psychedelic Furs, Richard Butler was very charismatic.
Sure.
Lead singer.
And he had a band after the Furs called Love Spit Love that was very good.
Yep.
And I dug, Thomas Dolby and the Eurythmics because, if you stripped all the synthy stuff away, both of them had great.
Yeah.
They were great songwriters, both bands. And if you added the synth stuff, even as a guitar player, I didn't think that it detracted from the production. It was all good stuff.
Yeah, Dolby was great. I saw him at the Stanley Theater with Nash the Slash opened the show. Are you familiar with him? Nash was he was a violin and he played electric violin and electric mandolin. He played in a progressive band from Toronto called FM, which it's kind of a legendary band if you're into like the more obscure prog bands, which I was, and I was really into. Don't ask me why, but my brother and I really got into the Toronto music scene.
Okay,
we used to go once a year to Toronto, and bands like, obviously Rush and Triumph. I got to work with those guys later on in my career.
What about like Max Webster?
Max Webster, yes, I met Kim. We did. I also signed. We signed Saga,
right,
to Inside Out Music when I was there, and we did. I got to meet Kim. He was doing a radio show for Q104 in Toronto.
He had an afternoon shift or something like that.
And we had the Saga guys go in, and that was great because I saw Max Webster with Rush back in the day, and that was very cool. There was a band called Santers, which I loved. I was a big Coney Hatch fan. Headpins.
And the Coney Hatch album that Kim Mitchell produced is great.
I actually love what was Out of Hand was actually produced, I believe, by Neil Kernan.
Okay.
And that's one of the best sounding records ever. I got to work with Neil with a band from Philadelphia called Heaven's Edge.
Okay.
And I think it was Neil. I think Neil did Out of Hand. I think he produced Out of Hand. I'm sure if I'm wrong, somebody will tell me I'm wrong. But
again, what's our thing whenever you and I talk? We're not experts, we're fans. So anything we say,
fans,
anything we say that's incorrect.
And I mean, I was in the business and I worked with these guys, but you can't know everything, But I did work with Neil with Heaven's Edge, and to this day, I think probably if you talk about '80s production, the best sounding record that I always come back to is "Turn Up the Radio" by Autograph.
Okay.
That is such a great, big 80s production,
Yep.
And that was Neil.
Big 80s production, but there were a lot of space between the tracks,
Yeah, the separation was great. You can feel the air in there. It wasn't a wall of sound. Right. And I love that. I love the separation. I love the spatial quality, I guess, and the way that it's actually an aural image is how I like to think of it. I don't know, this is weird, but I do see music when I listen to it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I do see it, and I visualize things, and if the production lends itself to that, and oftentimes it does, that just adds to the enjoyment of,
I have this weird sensation every now and then when I listen to something that really grabs me, that I am standing between the grooves of the record.
Mm-hmm.
And the needle passes over.
I love
me.
that. Yeah,
and
I
it's
get
like,
that.
And it's like, the wall on either side of me going up, that is the groove, and I'm that small. And it's just, it's so enveloping. It's all encompassing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't wait until I heard rumors. I've read articles about this in audiophile publications, but they're supposedly coming out with high definition vinyl, which sounds weird.
Sure.
But what it is, I don't know if you know the process of cutting a vinyl record. And the lacquer or the lathe that cuts the lacquer master that's used to stamp the vinyl records.
Okay.
It's a mechanical process where, it's basically the reverse, just like a microphone is the reverse of how a speaker works.
Right.
It's a transducer.
Okay.
It takes one form of energy and converts it to another, and mechanical energy is converted to electrical energy. And yes.
Test pattern.
Crickets, test pattern. And a speaker is the opposite. It takes electrical energy and turns it into mechanical energy. We're going to talk about it. Anyways. But yeah, so it's the way that records are cut, it's the opposite of how they're played. The needle picks up the vibrations and the grooves and turns it blah, 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 into electrical energy. Anyways, they use a laser now to cut the grooves. So they can cut them deeper and they can get more information in those grooves. So the fidelity is better. The volume is higher. And here's the big thing. You can get records. You can only get like 40 minutes of music on a vinyl disc. That's the way it used to be.
Right.
Now you can get a lot more because you can get the grooves closer.
I don't want to hear the other 40 minutes of shit that a band wouldn't have put on their album.
That is part of what the problem was with CDs.
Yes. They felt like they had to
You
fill
had to
up
use
that
up that
78 or 80 minutes. And
Absolutely.
It's like,
Yep.
nope. You had 40 good minutes just like every other band.
That's
has
the
40
way
good
it
minutes.
used to be.
Yep.
Yeah, you could sit down and you can listen to an entire record in one sitting with no problem. It's
Right.
not really like that, And yeah, CDs were the big problem.
You could listen to Machine Head in 35 minutes.
Yeah, generally 40 minutes.
All killer, no filler.
Yeah, absolutely all killer.
If Empire by Queensryche had been 40 or 44 minutes, it'd be my favorite album. They pushed it to 60, 62 minutes.
Yeah.
And there's some fluff in there that it's like,
yeah,
pare that down, man.
Yeah, but that's not even the worst example. I
Oh,
mean, that's still a good record.
But it was just one that was like the quality of the good songs versus the filler.
Yeah.
And by the way, Jim, thanks for demystifying how records are made and how speakers and stuff. My only proof in life of God has been that when I was a kid, they could play a record in Pittsburgh and I could listen to it in Frogtown, and I was like, there is a God. If somehow they can do that, and then you go and demystify it, thanks, buddy.
Yeah.
All the magic in my life is gone now.
I'll tell you just a real quick little thing.
What else are you going to spoil?
I'm going to spoil everything. Spoiler alert. I'm now going to explain the universe. No, when I was a kid, I'll never forget this. My grandfather had a big speaker, a 12-inch speaker in a big cabinet down in his basement, his work room, which was like, that was nirvana to me. I mean, his tools and everything, it just smelled great. And
old guy's tools there's magic in there.
Yeah.
Yep.
And he took care of them, and he's a very creative guy. I loved my grandfather. He was such an influence on me. And he took my little record player, and it was a little, not close and play, but it was a little suitcase. You could close it up and open it up, and he drilled a little hole in the side of it. And he took the wires and he hooked them up to the speaker in the record player. And then he took these wires out and hooked them up to this big 12-inch speaker in this cabinet. And that started working. That 12-inch speaker was playing the music for my little record player. I'd never seen anything like that before.
Right.
That stuck with me. And I studied electrical engineering and electronics for years after that. And it all started that one day. I'll never forget that. It blew my mind that you could do that. How does that work? I just had to know how it worked.
And that the profound effect on you, one of them was probably the depth of sound all of a sudden.
Absolutely. I mean, you were getting lower lows than I had ever heard.
Yeah.
Than I had ever heard before. And I started to question why, and the size of the speaker and the different
and the
frequencies.
Cabinet, right?
In the cabinet,
right.
Because the cabinet means a lot.
Right.
I still have my JBL 4311s downstairs. And that solid wood cabinet, man, those things are heavy. They just don't do that anymore.
Right.
It makes a difference, I mean, and it's a 3-way speaker system too. Don't see that too much anymore either. Like there's our Yamaha studio monitors over there. They're all 2-way systems,
right.
But anyways, we're getting a little bit off course there. But yeah, the whole mystique of rock and roll does seem to be going away, and the charts are dominated by really 3 things: pop, country, and rap hip hop. Which I kind of put into one category.
And the new country is so soulless because it attempts to fill that rock void, and it doesn't. There's 5. It's all 5-string bass.
Yeah.
And Mutt Lange production values on a lot of the stuff.
Yeah, that started it. That started a lot of. There was a bit of controversy when he produced the records for his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And it has become pop music, and they're using pop music techniques. They're using R&B techniques in hip hop,
Right.
Now, when I first heard Florida Georgia Line, it's the first record I ever heard where they added a rapper. The song was already a hit, but they had to do a new version of it with
a rapper.
And I'm like, well, this isn't country anymore, is it?
That should have been jumping the shark to them like Aerosmith and Run DMC did.
Yeah. But that was a hit.
I know, that should have been jumping the shark for both of those bands, and it was a hit.
Yeah.
And it was like there was this cultural change.
It worked for both of them.
And it was this big cultural change. It kept. And what's weird is at that time, that managed to keep Aerosmith alive and rolling, and I don't think it did too much for Run DMC.
I thought that it did. I thought that Run DMC actually had a good bump.
Well,
from that one.
I guess the bump would be that song was on a Run DMC album, right?
Yes, it was Run DMC was the artist with special guest Aerosmith, so it wasn't the other way around. Aerosmith was kind of making their comeback too,
right? But it really, that was one of the things that.
Yeah.
But there again, it was one of their old tunes that helped get their comeback going.
Yeah, it was different. It was a shift the way that things worked, but that one was kind of okay. I think it worked for both sides. I just don't get, I don't get some of the new collaborations though, and just in country music. I spent a lot of time in Nashville a couple of years ago. We were actually thinking about relocating our company down there, and I got to know the country scene at least a lot better than I had known it. And I got to tell you, man, after spending a lot of time in New York, LA, London, in the music scenes there, Nashville is, I got to tell you, it's a creepy scene. I hate to say this, but there's a lot of great people down there, and some of whom I've known and worked with, but it's a sleazy scene, and they really try to. You got to be down with them. You have to be accepted by the scene in Nashville, or you're locked out. You're locked out.
Wow.
And but they are changing, and it is pop music now. It's not the stuff that I think of country. I think of Willie and Waylon and
George Jones.
Right. Definitely George Jones and Johnny Paycheck and Johnny Cash. And I mean, the guys that really, it was Americana. And,
Right.
and it was the voice of the people, the working people.
And I really respected Dwight Yoakam for what he did, because
he started the new traditionalist movement.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because he wasn't trying to sound new and slick. He was, Bakersfield sound, and he hearkened back. Of course, he talked about Buck Owens and Merle.
Sure.
But then he would talk about 5 guys you'd never heard of.
Right.
And 3 of them were still playing in Bakersfield 3 nights a week.
Right.
And it was like, there you go.
Yeah.
That's a guy that he just didn't read about this and go, "Oh, I'm gonna do this." It was in his blood.
Yeah. And you could actually there were at least in those days still faint traces of where country western came from.
Right.
And it came from Irish, Scots folk music, and I think a lot of it happened when those people working on the railroads, taking it as we were, moving west and across country, and that morphed into today's country western, And there are other influences like blues, country blues, they incorporated that. But yeah, it's and it was so real and so organic,
right?
And you could feel it. I was never a huge country fan,
nor was I at all. But you could hear the sincerity.
Absolutely,
George Jones lived a lot of those songs.
Oh yeah,
and that new country is bereft of that.
And those guys, before rap became gangsta, okay, those guys were in jail. George Jones was in jail.
The outlaw country was named that for a pretty good reason.
Absolutely, yeah.
Those guys were kind of outlaws.
Yeah, they were. And Waylon was the man. Waylon was the man. That dude was badass. Of course, in Willie, and Johnny. I mean, come on, yeah, those guys were for real. They lived hard lives.
Merle Haggard, a hard living son of a bitch.
Yeah,
and it's like, yeah,
yes, he was
awesome.
Yes, he was. Yeah, I have a lot of respect for that, and I don't like the way the country music is going. A quick little side note: when I was in the industry, I was at Columbia Records at the time. What we used to do, part of what my job used to be, obviously you're familiar with Billboard magazine, right?
Correct.
It was the industry magazine, and they published the sales charts every week. So you had the Billboard Top 200, which all hits, regardless of genre, the top hits, And then you had the country charts and the rock charts and the radio, But what we used to do, the way that they used to compile those charts is they had a list of record retailers around the country that they used to call every week.
Yeah, reporting, yeah.
Billboard reporters.
Yep.
What I used to do, and this is how it used to work, truth, I used to call those stores and ask for favors. When Billboard calls you this week, could you please put, the new Judas Priest record in your top 10 sales this week or something like that? But you would manipulate the charts that way. You would call in favors. You got to know the Billboard reporters, and you took care of them in various ways, sort of akin to radio station payola, But I'm not saying that, but we did things for the retailers,
No cocaine?
for the reports.
No cocaine?
There was. Dude, I worked in the record industry in New York in the 80s. What do you think? Okay.
Cocaine!
Cocaine. The coca, the yayo. Anyways.
Peruvian marching powder.
Yeah.
Colombian conversation dust.
Bolivian. Was it Bolivian marching powder? What was it? Yeah. Anyways, so we did that. But then there was a certain point where a guy by the name of Mike Shallett invented something called SoundScan.
Oh, yeah.
He was out of Connecticut, a marketing company out of Connecticut. And what SoundScan did is it was an electronic system that they were installed into all the record retailers, a lot of the record retailers across the United States. And so instead of reporting the sales verbally, the sales were compiled by actual sales, pulling an electronic wand across the UPC code when you bought the record, and that's how they registered the sale. So it became a lot more honest. One of the things that came out of that was all of a sudden we realized in the industry something we didn't know. country music was freaking huge.
Right.
And all of a sudden, the country artists were at the top of the charts after the implementation of SoundScan. And it wasn't like that before them because they just weren't, Nashville wasn't savvy. They weren't doing what New York and LA were doing and manipulating the sales charts through favors. So that was interesting. But the country scene is just changed, like every scene has changed, like what we're talking about tonight, rock and roll. It's not what it used to be. And rock and roll, I mean, it was blue collar. It was a rebel yell.
Right.
It was defiance. You know, it had attitude. And it was dangerous.
And now it's used to sell boner pills and investment portfolios.
Yeah. Well, it's been completely co-opted.
Right.
In fact, it was beginning to be co-opted in the 70s when it was really hitting its stride.
I remember hearing "Lust for Life" by Iggy Pop.
Oh, that's everywhere.
For Carnival Cruises, and I was like, does Iggy know
everywhere.
about this? He's going to shit his pants.
Well, unfortunately, Iggy has nothing to do with it.
Right, but
because the
that
recording
was my
is
thinking
owned
at the time, right?
Yeah, the recording is owned by the record company.
Right.
Which is, a lot of people don't, maybe if you don't know how that works, when you sign a recording deal, that recording, you might still own the song, but that particular recording of the song is owned in perpetuity forever by the record company, usually. So that's the way that works. So
Hold on to your publishing, kids.
Publishing is very, very important, and that's something we're going to get into on later shows. And Richie, who joined us earlier, Richie Ranno, is in the middle of a big stink with his publishing. And I'm not going to, I'll get into that later. But yeah, publishing is very important. Keep what's yours. Keep the songs. Keep your publishing. It's a way to make money. Your merchandising, your logos, your image. That's the way. You're not going to make money through record sales anymore. It's live appearances, publishing, merchandising, and endorsements. And if you can own the recordings to your songs, some people, like, there's a big story recently that Taylor Swift could not. She wanted to get back the rights to her recordings, which they're not going to sell it to her. So she's threatening to re-record all of her classic songs. Okay. So she will she'll own those recordings, and she can exploit them in any way that she wants. Recently, Squeeze. We were talking about Squeeze earlier. They did the same thing. All their greatest hits, they re-recorded a lot of their records because they couldn't get the rights back from A&M Records, which was their record company.
And I heard something that, like, 9 out of 10 diehard Squeeze fans can't tell the difference.
Yeah, because they made a real effort. When I understand, I haven't done an A/B myself, and I'm a huge Squeeze fan. I'm sure I can. If there is a difference, I'll be able to hear it. But yeah, they made a real effort to copy the sounds just the way they had done them the first time. So, have you heard that? Have you heard their stuff? The re-recordings? I mean, the re-recordings.
No.
Yeah.
I did. In my collection, I have and I should have looked. I have a Atlanta Rhythm Section's Greatest Hits, which is an amazing collection of songs.
I love Atlanta Rhythm Section. I thought they were a great band.
It's the re-recorded versions, and they are real close. But there's something in every song that you go, that's not quite right.
Yeah.
They're almost there.
Yeah, you begin to realize just how every nuance, the topography of every song,
right.
You memorize that. That becomes part of, it clicks with you. You might not think that it would, but it does. And when you hear that difference, it registers.
Yep.
It definitely does. Yeah, music is such a powerful thing. I mean, like when I hear, they say that music and smell, the sense of smell, will take you back and put you in a place in the past more than anything else. And I truly believe that.
Sure.
I truly believe that. When I hear, there are certain songs, just off the top of my head, like, Lady by the Little River Band. Okay. When I hear that song, I'm in South Park with my buddies, smoking a joint, drinking Mickey's Big Mouth, you know. And it's so vivid.
Right.
And it's the music that puts you there,
and
you know?
And it's every ingredient when you hear that.
Absolutely.
Nothing's missing, right?
No. It's a total recall.
Yep.
It's an absolute total recall. And I love that about music. And yeah, I get a couple of drinks in me. Maybe I'll burn one, you know. I don't do that much anymore, but every now and then. And just I'll put some old music on. And again, I don't want to act like I'm just living in the past, but yes, I'm a nostalgic guy. And I love what music does. I love how it takes me back to those times. And you and I talked about this earlier, because I discovered that music for the first time as it was happening.
Right.
We're lucky. You and I are very fortunate to be alive when we're, you know.
One of the enduring classic rock songs is Don't Stop Believin'.
Yeah.
Good or bad, whatever you think of it, it's an enduring classic rock song. I
believe it's still the #1 most downloaded song in history.
You and I lived in a world before that song.
Yeah.
We remember hearing that song the fall or whatever that it came out. And it was like, and whatever you thought of it then was just like, oh, you know.
I was already starting to lose interest in Journey when that song came out, because to me, the pinnacle was Infinity. The first record with Steve Perry. That record is so iconic to me.
Right.
And again, it brings back memories. When I put on Infinity and I hear Wheel in the Sky, it takes me right back to the basement, you know, where listening to those songs, hanging out with buddies, you know, smoking pot, you know, back in the day, in the late 70s. It's just good times, man.
And I think it's a privilege that we lived in a pre-classic rock world.
Yeah.
Where it wasn't...
It was fresh then.
It was fresh. It was too... and most of that stuff wasn't edgy. But it was too edgy to be co-opted by advertisers. You know, there were no cars being sold to...
At that time, yeah.
At that time to, you know, the Ballad of Dwight Fry. Whatever. You know, because that was... You wouldn't want to be associated with it.
It was still too dangerous, but I'll tell
Crazy
you what.
Train wasn't being played at football stadiums because it was the devil's music.
No, because the people that were listening to Crazy Train were still too young. They weren't targeting us as consumers.
Right.
And that's what's happening now. Well,
it's demographics.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And now we're older. We're the ones paying for the ball games, you know, when they
Yeah, and DVE, the people that sell the ads there know to go after the windows and siding companies. And, you know, because guys in their 50s are putting siding and windows on their houses, you know, so they know to target that. And so they're not going to play too many, if any, brand new rock songs.
Right.
That guy's going to go, I don't know who this is, and turn it over.
They co-opted the pop culture aspects, the fashion, even though the fashion in the 70s was kind of bad fashion, you know?
Sure.
I think during the 80s, the new wave thing, I think the large corporations jumped on new wave pretty quickly. And it was because of MTV.
Right.
And the people listening to that music were maybe a little bit older than we were listening to shit in the 70s, you know. I guess I don't know. But
and there again, the genres were nameable. I mean, new wave, I remember seeing shirts with the words new wave across the front of them. Horrible.
Yeah.
I remember seeing shirts with the word grunge across it.
That's bullshit.
Right.
That's just total
bullshit.
Yeah.
Because nobody involved in that scene would describe themselves as grunge. None of those guys from Seattle know what the hell grunge is.
Well, yeah. I mean, the whole Seattle thing, that's something I wanted to get into, but because that was the last big movement, I think, in rock.
Yes.
Was the grunge thing. But yeah, man, you'd see the guys in Pearl Jam with, wearing their shorts with long johns underneath and a flannel shirt tied around the waist. And,
Right.
They weren't wearing T-shirts that said grunge.
Right. They were wearing T-shirts that said Bad Company and Electro Harmonics.
Yeah. Oh man. Now that was a cool company.
Yep.
And yeah, you can buy Electro Harmonics pedals again. I thought that was very cool. But yeah, that's what I grew up with was that, and not to get off on that tangent.
Right.
But Electro Harmonics and MXR. But
still on my pedal board today.
Yeah, but then I know you had one. You had an ADA flanger, didn't you?
I did,
because
I
Pat
had
played one. Pat
I know.
Travers
I had
played.
an Electric Mistress. There was no place around here to get an ADA.
Yeah.
And the Electric Mistress will not do the The Travers thing. The ADA only.
I bought the ADA simply because Pat used one,
Awesome.
like all my friends, and yes, it became part of my sound. But yeah, getting back to the whole grunge thing, that was going around. I don't know what they were calling it back when it was, because it was happening for years in Seattle in labels like Sub Pop, where we're just little local,
right.
Little local companies. And, bands like the Melvins and Green River and
Mudhoney
and Soundgarden was back happening. So was Nirvana. They were recording records, for years before Nevermind came out, And Nevermind seems to be the pinnacle of the popularity of grunge. I mean, that changed everything. When that record hit, it changed everything. A lot of people forget, though, I was working with Alice in Chains at Columbia Records, and upstairs at Epic Records at CBS, Sony, they already had Pearl Jam, and it was already changing everything. We were getting rid of, I was already working with Heaven's Edge and Britney Fox and Warrant. Those bands were getting put on the back burner because everybody knew that this thing was happening. This Seattle thing was going to...
Okay.
But that was before Nirvana really popped.
But give me the...
Soundgarden was already signed to...
Give me the insider scoop here, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
If was Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Soundgarden, were they going to take over music no matter what? Or could the industry have kept Britney Fox and Warrant on the charts way up there if they had wanted to?
They probably could have.
I mean, was there a time
that's
when
a really good question?
Could you could not hold back the next wave?
I don't think you could hold back the next wave. I think the writing was on the wall and people knew it. There was a shift in society, and this music was coming.
Okay, so nowadays the label system is in ruins, pretty much.
Yeah.
So when you were in the game at that level,
mm-hmm.
the label system was the Titan. And you're saying that even without your support, these bands would have been heard.
They were being heard, and they were growing in popularity.
See?
And they were selling more records on a local level. And A&R guys learned to read the street in various ways. Even if it was like, I remember A&R used to, at one point it became, you know what I used to do? I used to call record stores. I told you I would call billboard reporters, but in the course of those phone calls, I would say, I would make sure, are you playing this in your store? Can I send you some promos? How about some posters?
Right.
Can you do a display for me? We'll pay for some co-op advertising for you. That's a whole other area we'll get into later. Right. But one of the things I would ask in addition to that was, so you have any local bands? Are you selling cassettes of local bands? And who's really happening? That became a big part of A&R. And the A&R guys, they were out there. They were going to the clubs, and I know they were running to Seattle. And it was a very consistent scene. It was a very specific scene, geographically specific, to the Pacific Northwest. And it was happening. So to answer your question, I think it would have happened anyways, but the record companies saw the writing on the wall, and they said, we better We better do something about this.
There you go. Okay.
So, and it was Sub Pop, and it was those bands happening organically, the bands that we just mentioned. But then, A&M ran out and signed Soundgarden.
Right.
I remember when Soundgarden first started happening, probably about 1987, 88, about 88, 89 maybe, somewhere in there. They had, what was the name of the record?
Well, Super Unknown and Bad Motorfinger were huge.
Bad Motorfinger was,
right.
Super Unknown was later.
Right.
But yeah, that was already out and happening.
But they had like 2 albums before that.
Yes, they did.
Right.
And another band that happened at the same time, that popped at the same time, who had been releasing records on their own, was Faith No More.
Nice.
And both of those bands really popped at the same time.
Right.
That happened right at the beginning, before Nirvana became a household name.
Right.
All right. We had already signed Alice in Chains at Columbia Records, and Pearl Jam was already signed to Epic. I don't think Nirvana had signed to DGC Geffen yet, or if they did, never mind. Certainly wasn't out yet. And of course, when that came out, it changed everything.
Right.
Super Unknown was maybe the last great grunge record, that kind of sealed it. It happened very fast, and it lost. It went away pretty fast too.
Right.
And it gave way to a whole bunch of other bands, which were sort of those faceless bands. Like, you had no stars in the bands. Bands like, I actually wrote some, like Chevelle, Shinedown, bands like that. They all started happening. That was part of the death of rock and roll. Those bands just did not have the personality. They didn't have any rock stars in the band. Like we said before, Dave Grohl was probably the last great big.
And rock and roll needs rock stars.
They do. Yeah. I do. Yeah. Yeah, it's that attitude, the David Lee Roths, the flamboyance, the bad boy image, whatever it is. Everybody, all the guys we mentioned before, they were all different in their own respects, but they had something. They had the it factor,
right?
And bands like Disturbed and Puddle of Mud, they wound up selling records, but they just. It's not going to go down in the annals of history. It's just not going to be remembered the way that...
And the second wave of the grunge, like I just had to look up here, like Smash, and not that they were a grunge band, not that any band
Smashing
was grunge,
Pumpkins,
but like Smashing Pumpkins was around during grunge. But then
right, they came out of Chicago, so it was a different scene.
But then right away, a band called Our Lady Peace, who sounded an awful lot
Canadian.
like the Pumpkins.
Yeah,
it's like...
Yeah, the sound-alike bands.
Right. And Nirvana had so many that they put out. And the one that Rich Mauser, the band that Rich Mauser plays with now occasionally.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I can't remember who that is.
They had October Sun was one of their albums. Let me look it up.
Oh, please do. Yeah, I
it's like
escaping me. Yeah, but
it's like, oh, you guys are trying so hard to sound like
right. That was the second wave, but the big guys were Alice in Chains and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and Nirvana, and then you had the Temple of the Dog, or I mean you had the they had the superstar bands where they started combining like Velvet Revolver and
Audio Slave and
Audio Slave was another one. Yeah, that was another one. Audio Slave was what? That was Soundgarden and Pearl Jam, right?
No, Audio Slave was Rage Against the Machine and Chris Cornell from
Soundgarden.
Right.
All right. So who was the band that was made up of
Temple of the Dog?
Wait a minute. Am I thinking of Temple of the? Is that who I'm thinking of?
Yeah, but that was like pre-stardom. Soundgarden and Pearl Jam.
No, what was the band that came after that with the Pearl Jam guys? I can't think of it. But yeah, so you had a bunch of like superstar groups and hybrids,
right.
from other bands.
And there was a band that was like half. It was Lane Staley and Mike McCready. Mad Season.
I don't remember Mad Season.
They had one album and it was great.
Wow,
there's a song in there called River of Deceit. Oh,
for the life of me, I can't remember that. And I worked with Lane, and I don't remember that. Wow. Boy, and I remembered when, and there you go. We're talking about our heroes, our rock stars. All those guys are gone.
Oh yeah.
Chris is gone. Lane's gone. Kurt Cobain is gone.
Yep.
You know, all those the leaders of all those bands are gone. You know, it's a shame. Yeah, man. So I don't know how we replace that. I don't know if it is going to be replaced. I don't think the great era of rock and roll will ever return. I hate to say that.
Nope. And
I just don't see it happening again. I think it's gone forever.
that era is gone, and it's because society moves so fast, and there's so much turnover now that, and like I said a little while ago, rock and roll needs rock stars, and for to grow a rock star, it takes a little while. And like you said, like David Lee Roth,
Yeah.
he had staying power. Bono, Dave Grohl, Bowie, those guys. I mean, if you had taken any one Bowie album, it wouldn't have made him a rock star. It was that staying power, that career.
Right, and bands don't have careers
Right.
anymore. They don't, not the way that they used to anyways.
You know, I mean, Queen was like this slow burn band.
Yeah.
They didn't burst on the scene. Well, they did. They burst on the scene 3 albums into their career.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, Night at the Opera was
Right.
the big...
And they burst on the scene and
Well,
had an immediate catalog you could go buy.
Killer Queen was cool. That was off a sheer heart attack. I think that was really the first time I ever heard Queen. What a unique sound.
Right.
I loved them. But then, of course, when Bohemian Rhapsody came out, that was a game changer. You know, it just changed everything. But people don't realize, you have to go back. Do you realize that the Beatles were only together for 9 years?
Sure. Right.
They changed the world forever. There will never be another band that has the impact of the Beatles.
And
ever.
I have a friend up in Punxsutawney, John Keeley, who he objectively dislikes the Beatles. And he says...
Fine.
Right. He says that
I don't get that, but
for their first 3 years, they were just kind of a boy band.
all right. Yeah.
And then I go, yeah, I said, maybe I'll agree with you there, buddy. But from year 4 to the end, they were changing music.
Yeah.
They made albums.
Yeah.
You know, without the Beatles making albums, bands like Deep Purple would not have an album worth of meaty material.
We talked about it. You know, obviously, you know, people that know my background know that my big thing was in progressive rock. You know, and
yeah, they made the album possible.
Right, and the concept album certainly was a phenomenon that came mainly out of progressive rock. But a lot of people list the first progressive rock record. When I would interview people and talk to them about, what do you think was the first progressive rock record? What do you think was the first? In your opinion, yeah, the very first.
I'm probably not smart enough to answer that.
I mean, I got a lot of answers. You know, people would say Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson, Days of Future Past by the Moody Blues, you know, different. But by and large, the number one answer was Sgt. Pepper, was the first prog rock record.
I disagree.
Do you? Do you really? I mean,
to me, I mean, those are all beautiful little pop songs that are all kind of strung together.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you look at it like that, it's thematic. So yeah, I mean,
it's thematic. Instrumentally, it was daring. It was creative. They did things that production-wise that had never been heard before.
It was probably
the Beach Boys'
first.
Pet Sounds was another record that, you know.
It was probably the first album that was made to listen to drop the needle on the first side and let it go the whole way through.
Yeah. Which harkens back to the jazz stuff that we were talking about before.
Right.
But I mean, when the Beatles, when they got tired, as the story goes, they got tired of the girls screaming. They felt like nobody was listening to their songs in concert. So they said, we're going to quit playing live.
That was 66, I think. Yeah.
And we're going to go into the studio and we're going to create music that we do not have to worry about recreating live. And that was the game changer right there. And Sir George Martin came into the fold, and the music that they created during that period is just the importance of it cannot be overstated. It really changed the world forever. You can't say that about a lot of things, right? Or many things.
And then to even up the songwriting ante for with Abbey Road.
Oh yeah, I mean they went Abbey Road, and Rubber Soul, Revolver, the White Album, Magical Mystery Tour. I mean lots of great stuff all the way up to Let It Be, and it was just the songs are so iconic. Everybody knows them. I mean it's just there's just no other.
And they messed with song structure.
Oh yeah, they did.
I mean,
sure they did.
They would put the chorus right at the beginning of the song.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, they did. In George being the fifth member of the band,
right.
George Martin, and rightly so. I mean, he really added a lot. It was a fantastic time in music. There was so much innovative stuff happening in the late 60s, the mid to late 60s, and then to the 70s, as we said, which is really our era
right.
of major influence, mainly. I was a little too young, although I loved the Beatles. I didn't understand them the way that I understand them now,
And I think they are to be understood as an adult.
Yeah.
Unless you were the 10, 12-year-old kid that saw them on Ed Sullivan and you were on board at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. For me, for you, as an adult, you can appreciate them.
And I certainly do. So, well, listen, let's wrap things up now. Dave, thanks so much for coming out.
Thanks for having me,
This has been fun. This was a weird night. This was different. We never did this before. We kind of just went for it, having Richie come in. And thanks to Richie Ranno from Starz for joining us on the show. Completely unplanned, unrehearsed. Our first roundtable recording. We're going to do more of these, and Dave's going to be joining us regularly in the future. And I hope that you will join us all as well. And thank you if you're listening to this. We thank you for listening to this. Tell your friends.
Tell your friend. If you're listening to this, you only have one friend. Tell him. It's a dude. You know it.
Or else we will have Richie Ranno call you personally at home and say, fuck you. But fuck you, everybody. Thanks for joining us for Don't Quit Your Day Job. For Dave Buzard and myself, thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Jim.